They called her worthless, a rejected Omega with no pack, no future, no hope. But on the night the winter moon turned blood red over the frontier auction, Lyra Vance made a choice that would shake kingdoms. She bought a man, not for love, but for survival. A scarred prisoner everyone feared, a beast in chains. What she didn't know? He was a fallen king, and their forbidden bargain would ignite a war that would either destroy them both or crown them rulers of a new world. This is their story. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from. The wind cut through the mountain pass like a blade forged in ice, carrying with it the scent of pine smoke and desperation. Lyra Vance pulled her threadbare cloak tighter around her shoulders as she approached the crumbling stone fortress that squatted at the edge of the wilderness like a wounded beast. Her boots crunched against frozen earth, each step a reminder of how far she'd fallen and how much further she was willing to go. Behind her lay the Silverpaw Pack, the only home she'd ever known. The pack that had rejected her 3 days ago in a ceremony so humiliating that even now the memory made her stomach twist. Alpha Gregor had stood before the entire assembly, his voice booming across the gathering grounds as he declared her Omega bond broken, her place in the pack revoked. The reason? She'd failed to bear children for the mate they'd chosen for her. A brutal enforcer named Cade who'd treated her like property rather than a person. Barren, they'd whispered. Weak. Useless. The pack had stripped her of her name blessing, the ceremonial marks that identified her as one of their own. They'd given her until sunrise to leave Packlands. No supplies, no protection. Just the clothes on her back and the coin she'd secretly saved over 5 years of working in the Pack's kitchens, money meant for a future that no longer existed. Most rejected Omegas didn't last a week beyond Pack boundaries. The wilderness was unforgiving, filled with rogues, wild predators, and territories controlled by Packs even more ruthless than Silverpaw. But Lyra had no intention of simply lying down and dying in some frozen ditch, forgotten and unmourned. She had a plan. A desperate, possibly insane plan. The fortress loomed larger as she climbed the final rise. Torches flickered in iron sconces along its walls, casting dancing shadows that made the ancient stone seem alive. This place had no name on any map. The frontier folk simply called it the Exchange, a black market where anything could be bought or sold if you had the coin and the stomach for it. Lyra had neither in abundance, but she had enough. And she had something more important, determination forged in the fires of rejection. A guard stepped from the shadows as she approached the main gate, a massive wolf shifter with a scar running from his temple to his jaw. His eyes raked over her, assessing, dismissing. "This ain't a place for lone Omegas, girl," he growled. "Turn around while you still can." Lyra met his gaze without flinching. 5 years with Cade had taught her that showing fear only made predators hungrier. "I have business inside." "What kind of business?" The guard's lip curled, revealing a flash of elongated canines. She pulled a small leather pouch from inside her cloak and let it drop into her palm with a heavy clink. The kind that requires privacy and discretion. The guard's demeanor shifted immediately, his eyes fixed on the pouch, calculating. After a moment, he stepped aside. "Third door on the left. Auction starts in 20 minutes. Don't cause trouble, and you might leave here alive." The interior of the fortress was worse than she'd imagined. The main corridor reeked of unwashed bodies, spilled alcohol, and something darker, the metallic tang of old blood. Rough-looking shifters and humans lined the walls, conducting business in hushed tones. Weapons changed hands, packages wrapped in oil-stained cloth were exchanged for stacks of bills. A woman in torn finery stumbled past, her eyes glassy and unfocused. Lyra kept her head down and her hand on the small blade hidden in her boot, a kitchen knife she'd stolen on her way out of Silverpaw. It wouldn't do much against a fully shifted werewolf, but it might buy her a few seconds. The auction room was a converted great hall, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadow. Rows of benches faced a raised platform where a heavy-set man in a stained waistcoat was arranging chains and shackles. The crowd was already gathering, about 30 people, maybe more. Mercenaries, traders, pack representatives looking for cheap labor, and a few like her, desperate individuals with secrets behind their eyes. Lyra found a seat in the back corner where she could watch both the platform and the exits. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced her breathing to remain steady. She'd come too far to lose her nerve now. First time? The voice came from her left, an older woman with silver-streaked hair and knowing eyes. Lyra hesitated, then nodded. Thought so. You've got that look. Half terrified, half determined. The woman chuckled without humor. Word of advice? Don't bid on anything in the first lot. Those are always the broken ones, displayed to whet appetites. The real offerings come later. I'm looking for something specific. Aren't we all, honey? The woman leaned closer, her voice dropping. But let me guess. You're not here for muscle or labor. You're here for something the packs won't give you. A child. Lyra's silence was answer enough. The older woman nodded knowingly. You're not the first Omega to come through here with that plan. Won't be the last. The auction runners, they keep a few breeding males on hand. Strong genetics, no questions asked. You pay your fee, make your arrangement, and 9 months later, you've got what you need to petition for pack acceptance elsewhere. It's not about pack acceptance, Lyra said quietly. It's about surviving. About having someone who's mine. Before the woman could respond, the auctioneer stepped onto the platform and banged a wooden gavel against a scarred podium. The room fell silent. Welcome, buyers, his voice carried across the hall with practiced ease. Tonight, we have a special selection for your consideration. Labor, protection, companionship, all available for the right price. As always, all sales are final, no refunds, no complaints. He grinned, revealing gold-capped teeth. Let's begin. The first lot was exactly as the older woman had predicted, a string of broken individuals who barely seemed aware of their surroundings. Addicts. The severely injured, people who'd lost themselves to the harshness of frontier life. The bidding was perfunctory, prices low. Lyra watched, feeling sick, as human beings were sold like livestock. The second lot was stronger, laborers mostly. Men and women with hard eyes and harder bodies, sentenced to indenture for crimes real or imagined. These fetched better prices, purchased by representatives of mining operations and logging camps always hungry for cheap labor. Then came the third lot, and everything changed. Now, gentlemen and ladies, the auctioneer announced, his grin widening, we come to our specialty offerings, for those seeking particular arrangements. He gestured to a side door. These individuals have been selected for their physical attributes, their genetic strength, perfect for those looking to enhance their bloodlines or fulfill certain needs. 6 men were led onto the platform in chains. All were shifters. Lyra could tell by the way they moved, the barely contained power in their frames despite their captivity. They ranged in age from early 20s to perhaps 40, all muscular, all radiating the kind of raw vitality that made them valuable commodities in this grim marketplace. The bidding was fierce. Lyra watched, calculating her remaining funds, trying to determine which one might suit her needs. She needed strength, good genetics for her child, but she also needed someone controllable, someone who wouldn't simply overpower her and take what he wanted. 4 of the 6 sold quickly, fetching prices that made Lyra's meager savings look like pocket change. She felt her plan crumbling before it had even begun. Perhaps this had been foolish. Perhaps she should have just walked into the wilderness and let the cold take her. Then they brought out the 5th man, and the room went silent. He was massive, easily 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to fill the doorway. His body was a roadmap of scars, some old and faded, others more recent. His hair was dark, shagged and unkempt, falling past his collar. Chains bound his wrists and ankles, but even restrained he moved with a predator's grace. But it was his eyes that captured Lyra's attention. Even from across the room she could see them, storm gray, cold as winter steel, and burning with an intelligence that set him apart from every other prisoner who'd crossed that platform. This was no broken man. This was something else entirely. Now here's an interesting case, the auctioneer said, and Lyra detected a note of unease in his voice. Found wandering the deep wilderness 2 months ago. No memory of his name, his pack, or his past. But as you can see, he's prime physical specimen, strong as an ox, heals fast, and he paused, choosing his words carefully. Remarkably disciplined for one with no recollection of training. Has he been tested? Someone called from the front row. Thoroughly. He's disease-free, in perfect health, and his shifting capabilities are intact. However, the auctioneer cleared his throat. He does have a tendency toward violence when provoked. We've lost 2 handlers, hence the heavy chains. The crowd murmured. Several people who'd been leaning forward now sat back. Violence was one thing in a laborer you could control. In a breeding male, it was a liability. Lyra stared at the man on the platform. He hadn't reacted to anything the auctioneer said. He simply stood there, his gaze sweeping across the crowd with the detached assessment of someone evaluating threats. When his eyes passed over her section, she felt a jolt run through her body. Recognition, though of what, she couldn't say. Starting bid, 50 silver, the auctioneer announced. Silence. Come now, look at him. Finest genetics you'll find this side of the high peak ranges. 40 silver? More silence. The man on the platform's expression didn't change, but Lyra thought she saw something flicker in his eyes. Not fear, not hope. Something darker. Resignation, perhaps. Or contempt. 30 silver, and that's robbery at this price. The older woman beside Lyra leaned over. Don't even think about it. Why not? Lyra whispered back. Because he's dangerous. You can see it. Everyone can see it. The smart money's staying away, and you should too. But Lyra couldn't look away from him. There was something about the way he held himself, the controlled power in his stillness. Everyone else on that platform had looked defeated, broken in some fundamental way. This man looked like a caged storm waiting to be unleashed, and maybe that was exactly what she needed. 25 silver. The auctioneer's voice had taken on a desperate edge. Surely someone sees the value here. Lyra's hand moved before her conscious mind caught up with her body. 25 silver. Every head in the room turned toward her. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up. The older woman beside her cursed under her breath, and on the platform, the prisoner's gray eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that stole the breath from her lungs. Well, well, the auctioneer said, recovering his composure. We have a bid. 25 silver from the lady in the back. Do I hear 30? The silence stretched. Lyra could feel the weight of judgment from the crowd. A lone Omega, clearly rejected by her pack, bidding on the most dangerous male in the auction. Some looked at her with pity, others with derision. A few with something that might have been grudging respect. Going once, going twice. The gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the hall. Sold! To the lady in gray. Lyra's legs felt weak as she stood. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. Now came the hard part, surviving what came next. The transaction was handled in a side room by a clerk who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Lyra counted out her silver, nearly every coin she had left, and received a bill of sale in return, along with a key to the prisoner's chains. You understand the terms? The clerk asked, not quite meeting her eyes. All sales final. No refunds. If he kills you, that's your problem. I understand. And you're aware that he's unstable? Memory loss can do strange things to a shifter's mind. He could be anyone, anything. I'll take my chances. The clerk shrugged and pushed a document across the table. Sign here. And here. Initial here. This releases the exchange from all liability regarding injuries, death, or property damage resulting from your purchase. Lyra signed without reading the fine print. What did it matter? If this went wrong, she'd be dead. Paperwork would be the least of her concerns. They brought him to her in the same side room, his chains clinking with each step. Up close, he was even more imposing. His presence seemed to fill the space, making the room feel smaller. The guards who'd escorted him retreated quickly, clearly happy to be rid of their charge. Then it was just the two of them. Lyra held up the key. I'm going to unlock these. Don't make me regret buying you. For the first time, the man spoke. His voice was deep, rough from disuse, with an accent she couldn't quite place. Why? Why what? Why buy me? You're clearly not wealthy. You're alone, which means you're either cast out or running. And you're terrified, though you're doing a decent job of hiding it. Those gray eyes studied her with unnerving focus. So why spend your last coin on the most dangerous man in the room? Lyra lifted her chin. Because I need something, and I think you might need something too. That makes us even. What could you possibly offer me? Freedom, eventually. She stepped closer, close enough to smell blood and iron and something wild beneath. Here's my proposal. I need a child. You give me that, and in return, I'll give you your liberty. No tricks, no traps, just a fair exchange. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or reassessment. You do realize I could simply overpower you, take what I want, and walk away? You could, Lyra agreed. But you won't. What makes you so certain? Because if you were that kind of man, you'd have done it already. The guard said you've killed 2 handlers, but both times were when they tried to beat you. You have violence in you, but it's controlled, purposeful. She held his gaze. You're not a beast. You're a man who's lost his way, and I'm offering you a chance to find it again. The silence stretched between them, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. Finally, he held out his chained wrists. My name is gone. I don't remember it. Give me one. Lyra's hands trembled slightly as she fitted the key into the first lock. Ronan Ash, he repeated as if testing the weight of it. The chains fell away from his wrists, then his ankles. He rolled his shoulders, and Lyra heard joints crack. Why that name? Ronan means little seal in old tongue. It's humble, forgettable, exactly what we need to be. She stepped back, putting distance between them now that he was free. And Ash because we're both rising from the ashes of our old lives. He looked down at his freed hands, flexing his fingers as if seeing them for the first time. You're either very brave or very foolish, Lyra Vance. I never told you my name. A ghost of a smile crossed his face, the first expression she'd seen from him beyond cold assessment. It's on the bill of sale, and judging by the crescent-shaped rejection scar on your left shoulder, visible when your cloak shifted, I'd say you were Omega-bound to Silverpaw Pack. They use that particular marking, which means you were cast out recently. Very recently. Lyra's hand unconsciously went to her shoulder, covering the scar. You're observant. I may not remember my past, but I remember how to read people, how to track, how to fight. The skills remain even when the history fades. He moved toward the door, his gait smooth despite months of captivity. So where are we going, my temporary owner? North, into the deep forest. There's abandoned territory beyond the established packlands. Dangerous, but unclaimed. We can survive there. Until you have your child. Then what? Then you're free to go wherever you want. Find yourself. Find your past. I won't hold you. Ronan paused at the threshold, looking back at her. In the torchlight, his eyes seemed to glow with their own internal fire. You know nothing about me. I could be a criminal, a murderer. I could be someone far worse than anything you've imagined. Then I guess we'll find out together, Lyra said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. But right now, you're all I've got, and I'm all you've got. So we make it work, or we both die trying. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Fair enough. Lead on, Lyra Vance. Let's see how far desperation and determination can take us. They left the exchange as snow began to fall, fat flakes that caught in Lyra's hair and melted against Ronan's scarred shoulders. Behind them, the fortress faded into the white curtain of the storm. Ahead lay wilderness, uncertainty, and a gamble that could either save them or destroy them both. Lyra had no illusions about the path she'd chosen. She'd bought a stranger, a man with no past and violence in his bones, and proposed a bargain that could go wrong in 1,000 different ways. But as they walked into the frozen night, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Maybe it was foolish, maybe it was desperate, but it was hers. And in a world that had taken everything else from her, that was enough. The journey north took 3 days through terrain that grew progressively wilder. They traveled mostly in silence, Ronan keeping pace beside her with the effortless endurance of a born predator. He didn't complain about the cold, the rough sleeping conditions, or the meager rations Lyra had managed to purchase with her last few coins. He simply endured, watchful and remote. On the second night, camped in a shallow cave while sleet rattled against the rocks, Lyra finally broke the silence. You don't remember anything? Not even fragments? Ronan stared into their small fire, his face cast in sharp relief by the flames. Flashes. Pieces that don't fit together. I remember fighting, always fighting. I remember stone halls and torchlight. And I remember... He paused, his jaw tightening. Blood. A lot of blood. Your own? I don't know. Maybe, probably. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. Does it frighten you? That you've tied yourself to someone who might be a monster? We're all monsters to someone, Lyra said softly. My pack saw me as defective, worthless. They looked at me and saw only what I couldn't give them. She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. But I'm not worthless, and neither are you. Whatever you were, whoever you were, that's the past. Right now, all that matters is surviving the present. Something in his expression softened, just fractionally. You're stronger than you look. I've had to be. They fell silent again, but it was a different quality of silence now, less wary, more companionable. On the third day, they reached the territory Lyra had heard about from traders, a stretch of ancient forest beyond the claimed lands, where the trees grew so tall and thick that sunlight barely penetrated to the forest floor. It was cold, isolated, and dangerous. It was perfect. They found a clearing beside a stream, sheltered on three sides by granite outcroppings. Together they built a crude shelter using fallen branches and pine boughs. It wouldn't withstand a serious storm, but it was a start. As dusk fell on their first day in the new territory, Lyra stood at the edge of the clearing, looking out into the shadowed forest. Behind her, she could hear Ronan moving around the camp, his steps sure and quiet. Second thoughts? His voice came from just behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Hundreds, she admitted. But I'm not turning back. Good. He moved to stand beside her, his gaze scanning the tree line with the automatic vigilance of someone trained to watch for threats. Because we're being watched. Lyra's breath caught. What? In the trees. North and east, 2, maybe 3 observers. Been tracking us since this morning. He said it calmly, as if discussing the weather. They're staying hidden for now, but they know we're here. Rogues? Unknown. Could be scouts from a nearby pack testing our boundaries. Could be rogues assessing whether we're worth attacking. Either way, we need to establish ourselves quickly. Show strength. Fear coiled in Lyra's stomach, but she pushed it down. How? Ronan turned to face her fully, and in his eyes she saw something shift, a predator's focus sharpening. By making it clear that this territory is ours, that we're not prey. He paused. And by fulfilling our bargain. The sooner you're with child, the sooner we look like an established unit rather than 2 vulnerable stragglers. Heat flooded Lyra's cheeks. She'd known this moment would come, had braced herself for it. But the reality of it, standing in the gathering darkness with this dangerous stranger, about to cross a threshold that couldn't be uncrossed, made her heart race. Tonight? Her voice came out smaller than she intended. Unless you want to wait for our watchers to decide we're easy targets. His tone was matter-of-fact, but not unkind. I won't force you, Lyra. If you've changed your mind, say so now. We'll find another way. She met his eyes, searching for... what? Menace? Lust? But all she saw was patience and something that might have been understanding. He was giving her a choice, even now. No, she said, straightening her shoulders. This is what I came here for. I haven't changed my mind. Ronan nodded once, then turned back toward the shelter. Then come. And Lyra? Yes? Whatever happens next, we face it together. That's the bargain. Not just a child for freedom, but partners in survival. Understood? Something in her chest loosened at his words. Understood. As they walked back to the shelter together, Lyra cast one last glance at the dark forest. Somewhere out there, eyes watched. Dangers lurked. The world she'd known had rejected her, and the world she was building could collapse at any moment. But for the first time since her rejection, she didn't feel alone. And in the wilderness, that might be the most dangerous weapon of all. The shelter smelled of fresh pine and damp earth. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the promise of a storm. Inside, firelight flickered across rough wooden walls, casting shadows that danced and merged. Lyra sat on the makeshift bedding they'd constructed from pine boughs and the single blanket she'd carried from civilization. Her hands trembled slightly as she unlaced her boots, hyper-aware of Ronan moving through the small space with quiet efficiency. He'd built up the fire, checked the entrance twice, and was now removing his torn shirt to reveal a torso that was a testament to violence survived. The scars were even more extensive than she'd realized. Some were clean lines, blade work. Others were ragged, the kind left by claws or teeth. A few looked like burns. He bore them without shame, moving with the unselfconscious grace of someone who'd long ago stopped caring what his body looked like to others. "You're staring," he said without turning around. "Sorry, I was just thinking that whoever you were, you've been through hell." Several hells, probably. He finally looked at her, and his expression was surprisingly gentle. "You're afraid?" It wasn't a question. Lyra considered lying, then decided against it. "Yes, but not of you. Not exactly." "Then what?" She struggled to find the words. "Of failing again. My mate, the one the pack chose for me, he blamed me for being barren, said I was broken, defective. What if he was right? What if I can't—" "Stop." Ronan crossed the space between them and crouched down so they were eye level. That male was a fool. The inability to conceive can come from either partner, and more often than not, it's about compatibility, not defect. You're not broken, Lyra. And whatever happens here, it's not a test you can fail. The certainty in his voice steadied her. She took a breath, then another. You seem very sure about that for someone who doesn't remember his past. Some knowledge is deeper than memory. He held out his hand, palm up. An offering, not a demand. We don't have to do this tonight. We have time. No, we don't. You said it yourself. We're being watched. We need to establish ourselves. She placed her hand in his, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers. And I need to stop being afraid of taking what I want. Something sparked in his gray eyes. Respect, perhaps, or recognition. Then take it. What followed was not the brutal claiming she'd feared with Cade, nor was it the romantic fantasy she'd once dreamed of as a young Omega. It was something else entirely. A transaction that somehow transformed into connection. Two survivors finding warmth in a cold world, bodies moving together with an intensity that surprised them both. Afterward, as they lay tangled together beneath the blanket, Lyra felt something shift inside her. Not just physically, though she hoped desperately that their coupling had taken root, but something deeper. A sense that perhaps she wasn't as alone as she'd thought. What are you thinking? Ronan's voice rumbled against her ear where her head rested on his chest. That this is the strangest arrangement I've ever made. And yet somehow, it feels right. His arm tightened around her. The Watchers have moved closer. They'll approach soon, probably at dawn. We need to be ready. Lyra tensed. How many? 3 for certain, possibly a 4th hanging back. All male, all shifters. They've been testing our perimeter, looking for weakness. What do they want? To assess threat level. To determine if we're prey or predators. He shifted, his warrior's instinct already planning. When they come, let me handle it. I need to establish dominance quickly. I'm not going to hide while you fight for us. I'm not asking you to hide. I'm asking you to trust me. Can you do that? Lyra thought about it. This man she'd known for less than a week. This stranger with no past and violence in his blood. Every rational part of her screamed that trusting him was madness, but rationality had abandoned her the moment she walked into that auction. I can try, she said finally. That's all I'm asking. They slept in shifts, taking turns keeping watch. When dawn broke cold and gray over the forest, Lyra was gathering water from the stream when she heard Ronan's voice, sharp with warning. Lyra, we have company. She dropped the water skin and ran back to the clearing. 4 men stood at the tree line, all in various stages of shift, eyes glowing amber, fingers extended into claws, postures radiating barely contained aggression. They were younger than Ronan, leaner, with the cocky arrogance of pack wolves who'd never faced a real challenge. The one in front, a sandy-haired male with a crooked nose, grinned when he saw her. Well, the rumors were true. Someone's actually stupid enough to try settling the dead zone. Ronan stepped between them and Lyra, his body language shifting into something predatory. This territory is claimed. Leave while you still can. Claimed? The sandy-haired wolf laughed and his companions joined in. By who? A packless nobody and a broken Omega? This is Blackridge territory, friend. Has been for 3 generations. Your scent markers are a mile south. This land is unclaimed wilderness. Was unclaimed, but we're expanding. And you're squatting on our new hunting grounds. The wolf's eyes slid past Ronan to Lyra, and his grin widened. Tell you what, leave the female and you can walk away. We'll take good care of her. The temperature in the clearing seemed to drop 10 degrees. When Ronan spoke, his voice was soft, almost gentle. That was somehow more terrifying than if he'd shouted. Say that again. The sandy-haired wolf's grin faltered. I said, he never finished the sentence. Ronan moved with a speed that shouldn't have been possible for someone his size. One moment he was 10 feet away. The next, his hand was wrapped around the wolf's throat, lifting him off his feet. The other 3 wolves surged forward, but Ronan's free hand shot out in a gesture that froze them mid-step. Don't! The single word carried absolute authority. Lyra watched, transfixed, as something changed in Ronan. His bearing, his presence, it was like watching a dormant volcano suddenly remember it was meant to erupt. The lost, uncertain man from the auction was gone. In his place stood someone else entirely, someone dangerous, someone used to being obeyed. You came onto my land, Ronan said quietly, his grip tightening on the struggling wolf's throat. You threatened my mate, and you thought, what? That I would simply roll over? Ronan, Lyra said carefully, don't kill him. For a heartbeat, she thought he wouldn't listen. His eyes had gone flat and cold, the eyes of someone who'd killed before and would kill again without hesitation. But then, slowly, he lowered the sandy-haired wolf to the ground and released him. The wolf collapsed, gasping and clutching his throat. His companions helped him up, their earlier arrogance completely evaporated. Tell your pack, Ronan said, his voice carrying across the clearing, that this territory belongs to Ronan Ash and his mate. Anyone who crosses our boundaries without permission will be dealt with, permanently. Am I understood? The sandy-haired wolf managed a nod, blood trickling from where Ronan's claws had pierced his skin. Good. Now run. They ran. Lyra waited until they disappeared into the forest before releasing the breath she'd been holding. That was necessary, Ronan finished. He turned to face her, and she could see him struggling to pull himself back from wherever he'd gone. I'm sorry you had to see that. Don't apologize. You protected us. You protected me. She moved closer, studying his face. Who were you, Ronan? Before you lost your memory. That wasn't just a fighter. That was someone who commanded armies. I don't know, but sometimes when the instincts take over, I catch glimpses. Stone halls, banners bearing symbols I can't quite remember, and always the sense that I was responsible for others, that their lives depended on my strength. He looked down at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. It terrifies me, Lyra. What if I was a tyrant, a monster who deserved whatever fate stripped my memory away? Or what if you were a protector, a leader who fought for those who couldn't fight for themselves? She took his hands in hers. We don't know. And until we do, I'm going to choose to believe the best about you. Because the man I've seen these past few days, he's been nothing but honorable. He searched her face, looking for something. You have more faith than I deserve. Maybe, or maybe I'm just desperate enough to see what I want to see. She smiled sadly. Either way, we're in this together now. The weeks that followed were a brutal education in frontier survival. They reinforced their shelter, adding a second room and proper insulation against the deepening cold. Ronan hunted, bringing back deer and wild boar that Lyra learned to butcher and preserve. She gathered herbs and edible plants, using knowledge gleaned from years in the pack kitchens to supplement their meat-heavy diet. And slowly, impossibly, they built something that resembled a life. The Blackridge wolves kept their distance, though Lyra sometimes caught sight of them watching from the tree line. Ronan had established his dominance, but she knew it was a temporary deterrent. Packs didn't like loose wolves in their territory, and eventually they'd return with greater numbers or a stronger challenger. 6 weeks after they'd claimed the territory, Lyra woke with a familiar queasiness that made her heart leap. She said nothing to Ronan at first, afraid to hope, afraid to jinx it. But when the feeling persisted for 3 days straight, accompanied by a heightened sense of smell and tender breaths, she couldn't deny it anymore. She was pregnant. The realization hit her one morning while she was grinding herbs for tea. Her hand went to her still flat stomach, and tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. After 5 years of failure, of being told she was barren, broken, worthless, she was carrying a child. Lyra? Ronan appeared in the doorway, concern etched on his scarred face. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. She laughed through her tears. Everything's right. Ronan, I'm pregnant. For a moment he stood frozen. Then a smile, genuine and unguarded, transformed his features. He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her with a gentleness that belied his strength. You're certain? As certain as I can be without a healer. All the signs are there. He pulled back to look at her, his hands cradling her face. Then we've done it. You're going to have your child. The joy in her chest dimmed slightly. And you'll have your freedom. That was the bargain. Something flickered across his expression. Regret? Disappointment? It was gone before she could identify it. Yes, the bargain. He released her, stepping back. We should celebrate. I'll hunt something special for dinner. He left before she could respond, disappearing into the forest with the silent efficiency that characterized all his movements. Lyra stood alone in the shelter, one hand still pressed to her stomach, feeling the first stirrings of a truth she wasn't ready to face. She didn't want him to leave. Somewhere between the auction and now, between survival and partnership, her feelings had evolved into something far more complex than their simple transaction. She'd come to rely on his strength, yes, but also his quiet companionship, the way he listened when she talked about her past, the way he never made her feel weak for having emotions, the way his presence made her feel safe for the first time in years. But the bargain was the bargain. She'd given her word, and she wouldn't trap him with sentiment or manipulation. If he wanted to leave when the child was born, she'd let him go, even if it broke her heart. That night, Ronan returned with a wild turkey and a string of rabbits. They cooked together in comfortable silence, the way they'd learned to work in tandem over the past weeks. But there was a tension in the air now, an awareness of the clock ticking down on their arrangement. We need to talk about what comes next, Ronan said as they ate. Lyra's stomach tightened. All right. A pregnancy in the wilderness is dangerous. You'll need proper nutrition, protection from the elements, and access to a healer when your time comes. Our shelter is adequate for 2 healthy adults, but for a pregnant Omega and eventually a newborn. He shook his head. We need more. Better. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we fortify. We've got about 7 months if this is a typical shifter pregnancy. We use that time to build something permanent. A real cabin with a root cellar, smokehouse, proper defenses. And we need allies. Allies? Ronan, we're packless. No one's going to ally with us. Then we make them. His eyes glinted in the firelight. That Blackridge pack. They're young, undisciplined. Their territory is expanding, which means they're having internal conflicts about resources and hierarchy. We offer them something they need, and in exchange, they give us security. What could we possibly offer them? Training, discipline. I don't know how I know this, but I can teach combat strategy, pack dynamics, leadership. He leaned forward, intensity radiating from him. That sandy-haired wolf who challenged us, he had the bearing of someone trying too hard, someone not fully secure in his position, which means there's fracture in their chain of command. We exploit that. Lyra stared at him. You want to insert yourself into another pack's politics? I want to ensure my... He caught himself. I want to ensure you and the child are safe. If that means playing politics, so be it. The slip hadn't gone unnoticed. My what? My mate? My family? But Lyra didn't push. Instead, she considered his plan with the tactical mind she'd developed over years of navigating pack hierarchies from the bottom rung. It's risky, she said finally. If they perceive us as a threat rather than an asset, they could decide to eliminate us outright. They could try. There was no arrogance in his tone, just flat certainty. But they won't succeed, and once they understand that, negotiation becomes possible. You're very confident for someone who doesn't remember being a warrior. The body remembers what the mind forgets. He flexed his scarred hands. Every time I fight, every time I move, it's like following a path worn smooth by countless repetitions. I don't know who trained me, but they trained me well enough to protect what's mine. There it was again, that possessive edge that made her pulse quicken. All right, Lyra said, we'll try it your way. But Ronan, if this goes wrong, we run. No heroic last stands, we protect the baby first. Agreed. The opportunity came sooner than expected. 3 days later, a young Blackridge wolf appeared at their boundary line. Not the sandy-haired aggressor from before, but a female with intelligent brown eyes and cautious body language. I come under truce flag, she called out, holding up a white cloth. To speak with the male called Ronan Ash. Ronan emerged from the cabin they'd been building, Lyra close behind. I'm listening. My name is Sarah. I'm beta to the Blackridge Pack, second rank under Alpha Garrett. She paused, choosing her words carefully. We've been watching you. The way you handled Kane and his patrol. The way you fortified your position. You're no ordinary rogue. Is there a point to this observation? Yes. We have a problem, and I think you might be the solution. Sarah glanced at Lyra, then back to Ronan. Our pack is fracturing. Alpha Garrett is strong but inexperienced. He inherited leadership when his father died unexpectedly last year. Some of the older wolves are challenging his authority. Some of the younger ones, like Kane, are getting bold. We're heading towards civil war, and winter's coming. A divided pack won't survive. Ronan crossed his arms. Again, what does this have to do with me? Garrett needs an advisor, someone with military experience, someone not embedded in our pack politics, someone who can train our fighters and help establish order. She met his gaze steadily. In exchange, we offer you and your mate protected status within our territory, access to our healers, a share of pack resources. No. The word came from Lyra, sharp and immediate. Both Ronan and Sarah turned to her in surprise. No, we're not joining your pack. I've been pack. I know how that story ends. We're not asking you to join, Sarah said quickly. You'd remain independent, sovereign over your own territory, but allied with us, protected by us. And when your alpha decides we're more useful as subordinates than allies, Lyra demanded. When he decides that having a strong warrior like Ronan as a potential rival is too dangerous, what then? Sarah's expression hardened. Then we wouldn't be worthy of the alliance in the first place. Look, I understand your hesitation, but the alternative is that Kane's faction gains power, and they've already made it clear they view you as invaders. At least with Garrett, you have a chance at peaceful coexistence. Lyra looked at Ronan, trying to read his expression. He was considering it. She could see the tactical wheels turning behind those gray eyes. Give us 3 days to discuss it, he said finally. Sarah nodded. 3 days. And Ronan, whatever you decide, make it fast. Kane's growing bolder. If you're not with us, you need to be ready for him to move against you directly. After she left, Lyra rounded on Ronan. You're actually considering this? I'm considering keeping you alive. His voice was level but firm. Sarah's right. We can't stay neutral forever. Either we ally with the reasonable faction of Blackridge, or we face the unreasonable faction alone. Your pregnancy changes everything, Lyra. Every fight I take, every challenge I face, it's a risk to you and the baby. An alliance mitigates that risk. Or it traps us in their web. Ronan, I've seen how packs operate. Today it's advisor and ally. Tomorrow it's subordinate and subject. I won't go back to that. I won't let them control me again. He moved closer, his hands gentle on her shoulders. No one will control you, I swear it. If we do this, we do it with clear boundaries and exit clauses. The moment they overstep, we're gone. You make it sound so simple. It's not simple. It's survival. And survival is rarely clean. He tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. But I will not let anyone hurt you. Not Kane. Not Garrett. Not anyone. You have my word. The intensity in his voice, the absolute conviction, it should have frightened her. Instead, it made her feel safer than she had in years. 3 days, she said softly. We'll decide in 3 days. But fate, as always, had other plans. On the second night, Lyra woke to Ronan's hand over her mouth and his voice urgent in her ear. Don't make a sound. We have incoming. Multiple hostiles. Her heart hammered as he removed his hand. How many? At least 6. Maybe more. They're trying to surround the cabin. He moved to the window, his body tense. Kane's making his move. What do we do? You hide in the root cellar. I'll handle them. No, We fight together or we run together. I'm not hiding while you... The window exploded inward in a shower of glass. A massive wolf, Cain in his shifted form, crashed through, followed by two others. Ronan met the first one with a roar that shook the cabin walls, his own shift flowing over him like liquid darkness. Lyra had never seen him shift before. His wolf form was enormous, easily 50 pounds heavier than their attackers, with midnight black fur and those same storm-gray eyes blazing with predatory focus. He moved like death itself, all efficient brutality and lethal precision. But there were too many. Two more wolves burst through the door. Another came through the second window. Lyra grabbed the iron poker from the fireplace and swung at the nearest attacker, catching him across the muzzle. He yelped and retreated, but another took his place. The cabin descended into chaos. Blood and fur and snarls filled the air. Ronan fought like a demon, taking down two wolves in rapid succession, but for every one he disabled, another appeared. They were coordinated, working together to separate him from Lyra. One of them, a gray-brown wolf with scarred ears, lunged past Ronan's defenses and went straight for Lyra. She swung the poker again, but he caught it in his jaws and wrenched it from her hands. His teeth bared, saliva dripping, and she knew with absolute certainty that she was about to die. Then Ronan was there, impossibly fast, catching the gray-brown wolf by the throat and slamming him into the wall with enough force to crack timber. The wolf went limp, but the distraction cost him. Cain seized the opportunity, his jaws closing around Ronan's shoulder, tearing deep. Ronan howled in pain and rage, throwing Cain off, but the damage was done. Blood poured from the wound, matting his dark fur. "Enough!" The voice came from outside, sharp with authority. The fighting stopped. The wolves attacking them backed away, though they kept their positions. Through the shattered doorway stepped a man in his mid-30s, powerfully built, with eyes the color of old gold. He radiated alpha presence like heat from a fire. "Cain," the man said quietly, "I gave specific orders. No attacks on the rogues." Cain shifted back to human form, naked and defiant. "They're a threat, Garrett. You know it, even if you won't admit it. They're potential allies, which you would know if you'd been at the council meeting instead of planning this idiot assault." Garrett's gaze swept the ruined cabin, landing on Ronan, who'd also shifted back and stood bleeding but unbowed in front of Lyra. "I apologize for my pack members' actions. This was unauthorized and will be dealt with." "Your apology means nothing if your wolves can attack at will," Ronan said, his voice steady despite the blood running down his arm. "Which is why I'm here to make it right." Garrett stepped into the cabin, his wolves parting to let him through. "Cain has been agitating for this fight since you first arrived. I should have shut him down harder. That failure is mine, and I'll carry it." He turned to Cain. "You're stripped of rank, effective immediately. Report to the Omega quarters and await formal discipline." Cain's face went purple with rage. "You're demoting me? For them?" "I'm demoting you for disobeying a direct order from your alpha, for endangering pack security with unauthorized violence, and for forcing my hand in a negotiation I was trying to conduct with subtlety." Garrett's voice dropped to a growl. "Now get out of my sight before I decide exile is a better option." The other wolves shifted nervously. This was pack politics at its most dangerous, an alpha publicly humiliating a high-ranking wolf. Cain could submit, or he could challenge. The tension stretched like a wire about to snap. Finally, Cain lowered his eyes. "Yes, Alpha." He left, his supporters trailing behind him. The cabin felt suddenly larger, emptier. Garrett turned back to Ronan and Lyra. "Let me be clear about something. I want this alliance. I need what you can offer, but I won't force it. If you want to stay independent, I'll respect that and make sure my pack does the same. If you want to work with us, we'll negotiate terms that protect everyone's interests." Ronan was silent for a long moment, and Lyra could feel him weighing options, calculating risks. Finally, he spoke. "We'll ally with you, but on 3 conditions. First, our territory remains sovereign. Your wolves don't cross our boundaries without explicit permission. Second, Lyra gets unrestricted access to your healers, especially as her pregnancy progresses. And third, if at any point you prove untrustworthy, we walk away. No obligations, no consequences." Garrett considered, then nodded. "Agreed. In exchange, you help me train my warriors and advise on pack defense. and you back my authority against internal challenges. Done. The two men clasped forearms, sealing the bargain. Lyra watched, her hand unconsciously moving to her stomach. They'd survived, barely. But Kane's attack had proven Ronan right. They couldn't stay isolated. In the wilderness, you either found allies or became prey. As Garrett and his wolves departed, leaving Ronan and Lyra alone in their destroyed cabin, she finally let herself shake. Ronan pulled her close, his wounded shoulder forgotten. "We're safe now," he murmured against her hair. But Lyra knew better. Safety was an illusion in the wild. They'd won this round, but the game was far from over. And somewhere in the darkness, Kane was plotting his revenge. The wound on Ronan's shoulder refused to heal properly. 3 weeks after Kane's attack, it still wept clear fluid and burned with an unnatural heat that made Ronan's jaw clench even when he thought Lyra wasn't watching. She was always watching now, her Omega instincts sharpened by pregnancy and fear. "You need to see the pack healer," she said for the 10th time as she changed his bandages. "It's fine. It's infected. Look at this." She pointed to the red streaks radiating from the bite. "That's poison spreading through your system. Ronan, please." He caught her wrist gently. "The healer will ask questions. About my scars, about my strength, about why a simple bite wound is reacting like silver poisoning when there was no silver involved." "So what? Let them ask. Because the answers might be dangerous." His gray eyes met hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "I've been having dreams, Lyra, fragments of memory breaking through, and what I'm seeing, it frightens me." She sat down beside him on their rebuilt bed. The cabin was whole again, reinforced with help from Garrett's pack, but the scars of violence remained in the replaced floorboards and new windows. "Tell me." "I see a throne. Black stone, carved with symbols I can't quite read. I see myself sitting on it, wearing armor that weighs heavy on my shoulders. And I see blood. Rivers of it. Bodies stacked like cordwood in a courtyard while I watch from above." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "What if I was a monster, Lyra? What if I deserved to lose everything? Or what if you were a king defending his people? Context matters, Ronan. You don't know what those memories mean." She pressed her hand to his uninjured shoulder. "But I know who you are now. The man who protects me, who's kept his word about our bargain, who's teaching Garrett's wolves discipline instead of cruelty. That's the man I see. You see what you want to see?" "Maybe, but I'm still right about the healer." She stood, crossing her arms over her slightly rounded belly. "You're going today, or I'm going to Garrett and telling him you're compromised. Your choice." A smile ghosted across his face despite the pain. "You've gotten bossy since you got pregnant. I've gotten smart about keeping you alive. There's a difference." The Blackridge healer was an ancient woman named Mora, who operated out of a cabin that smelled of dried herbs and wolf musk. She took one look at Ronan's wound and made a sound like grinding stones. "Sit," she commanded, pointing at a wooden stool. "And you," she fixed Lyra with a sharp stare, "make yourself useful. Grind those purple flowers in the mortar. Fine powder, mind you." Lyra obeyed while Mora examined Ronan's shoulder with gnarled fingers that moved with surprising gentleness. The old healer's expression shifted from concern to confusion to something that might have been fear. "This isn't infection," Mora said slowly. "This is recognition." "What does that mean?" Ronan asked. "It means Kane's bite triggered something in your blood. Something old. Very old." She reached for a clay jar on her shelf, scooping out a thick green salve. "I need to ask you a question, stranger, and I need you to answer truthfully. Have you ever been to the Shadowlands?" The room went still. Even Lyra, who didn't fully understand pack geography, knew that name. The Shadowlands were the heart of the old territories, where the most ancient and powerful packs maintained their holds. Common wolves didn't go there. Only alphas of significant lineage, or those summoned by the Council of Fangs. "I don't know," Ronan said honestly. "I don't remember." Mora applied the salve with firm strokes, and Ronan hissed through his teeth. "Well, your body remembers. This reaction, it only happens when royal blood encounters pack venom. A defense mechanism bred into the old bloodlines to detect poison." She wrapped fresh bandages around his shoulder. "Which means you're either descended from one of the 5 royal houses, or you're something even more rare." What's more rare than royalty? Lyra asked. Mora's eyes glinted in the firelight. A king. The word hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. That's impossible, Ronan said, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? Think, boy. Your size, your instinctive command presence, the way you fight like someone who's led armies, the scars that map decades of warfare on a body that's barely seen 30 winters. Mora leaned back, studying him. There's only one kingdom that's fallen in the last 5 years. Only one throne left empty. Thornhaven, Lyra breathed. Mora nodded. Thornhaven, the Obsidian Throne. Ruled for 300 years by the Ashbourne line until King Darius was betrayed and murdered by his own brother. The palace was burned, the royal family slaughtered, or so the stories say. Ronan had gone very still. Ashbourne. I chose the name Ash because Lyra suggested it, but when she said it, it felt familiar. Because it's yours. Mora stood, moving to a locked chest in the corner. She pulled out a rolled parchment, yellowed with age. I was born in Thornhaven, fled when the Civil War started, but I kept this, a proclamation from King Darius's coronation. She unrolled it, revealing an elaborate illustration of a massive man with dark hair and gray eyes, wearing black armor and a crown of thorns. Look familiar? Lyra's hand flew to her mouth. The resemblance was unmistakable. Same jaw, same broad shoulders, same eyes that seemed to see through deception. That's not possible, Ronan repeated, but he was staring at the image like a man confronted with his own ghost. If I was this king, why don't I remember? Why was I found wandering the wilderness with no memory? Because someone wanted you forgotten, Mora said grimly. The brother who betrayed you, Marcus Ashbourne, he didn't just want your throne. He wanted you erased. There are old magics, forbidden rituals, ways to strip a shifter of their memories, their identity, to reduce a king to nothing. But he survived, Lyra said, her mind racing. Ronan survived, which means King Darius lives, and Marcus's claim to the Obsidian Throne is built on a lie. Mora rolled up the parchment. This is dangerous knowledge, children. If word gets out that the true king lives, Marcus will send assassins. The Shadow Guard doesn't forgive loose ends. Ronan stood abruptly, pacing the small cabin like a caged predator. I don't want a throne. I don't want a kingdom. I just want... He looked at Lyra, and the raw emotion in his eyes made her chest ache. I just want to keep my promises. Sometimes we don't get to choose our destiny, Mora said, but we do get to choose how we face it. They left the healer's cabin in silence, both processing the revelation that had turned their world inside out. Lyra's thoughts churned with possibilities and dangers. If Ronan was truly King Darius, everything changed. Their simple bargain, a child for freedom, became impossibly complicated. A king had responsibilities, a kingdom waiting to be reclaimed. She was just a rejected Omega who'd bought a man at auction. What place did she have in that story? Say something, Ronan said as they walked back toward their territory. I don't know what to say. I bought a king. You bought a broken man with no past. That's still all I am. Is it? She stopped walking, forcing him to face her. Because I saw your expression in there. When she said Thornhaven, when she showed you that image, part of you recognized it, part of you remembers. He was quiet for a long moment. Yes, it's like hearing a song you'd forgotten you knew. The melody comes back in pieces. I remember stone corridors, the weight of a crown, the sound of swords clashing in a training yard, and I remember betrayal, the look in Marcus's eyes when he broke off, his face twisting with pain that had nothing to do with his wounded shoulder. When he what? Lyra prompted gently. When he drove his blade into my back, during what I thought was a strategy meeting, just him and me discussing border defenses. I remember falling. I remember the cold. And then nothing. Just darkness until I woke in that cell 2 months ago. Lyra felt tears sting her eyes. I'm so sorry. Don't be. If Marcus hadn't betrayed me, I never would have ended up at that auction. Never would have met you. Never would have... He cupped her face in his hands. You gave me a purpose when I had nothing. A reason to survive. Whether I'm a king or a nobody, That doesn't change. But it does change things. You have people who need you, a kingdom suffering under a false ruler. You can't just ignore that. Can I? I have no army, no allies, no proof of who I am beyond an old healer's suspicions and half-remembered dreams. Marcus controls the Obsidian Throne and the Shadow Guard. What am I supposed to do? Walk up to the gates and politely ask for my kingdom back? Maybe not politely, Lyra said slowly, an idea forming. But there are other ways to take back what's yours. Over the next month, Lyra's pregnancy began to show in earnest, a small, firm swell that made her clothes tight and her back ache. But her mind had never been sharper. She'd survived 5 years at the bottom of Silverpaw's hierarchy by being smart, by watching and learning how power really worked. And now she was going to put those lessons to use. She started with Sarah, the Blackridge Beta. They met in neutral territory, ostensibly so Lyra could learn more about pregnancy care, but the conversation quickly turned to politics. Garrett's been different since Ronan started training the warriors, Sarah said as they walked along the ridgeline. Stronger, more confident. The challenges from the older wolves have stopped. Because they respect Ronan's judgment, Lyra observed. Because they fear his strength. Sarah glanced at her. There are rumors, about your mate. Some say he's not just a skilled fighter. Some say he moves like someone who's commanded armies. And what do you say? Sarah was quiet for a moment. I say that I've seen a lot of warriors in my time, and I've never seen anyone fight like Ronan. It's not just skill, it's instinct, the kind that comes from decades of warfare, even though he can't be more than 35 winters old. Lyra made a decision. Trust was a gamble, but sometimes you had to bet everything on a single roll. What if I told you he was more than just a warrior? What if I told you he was a king? Sarah stopped walking. I'd say you were either insane or desperate. What if I could prove it? Then I'd say you're playing a very dangerous game. Kings have enemies, Lyra. Powerful enemies. The kind that don't stop until everyone connected to the king is dead. I know, but those same enemies have been ruling through fear and lies. What if we could expose them? What if we could show the Pax that the Obsidian Throne belongs to someone else? Sarah studied her with calculating eyes. You're not just talking about revenge. You're talking about war. I'm talking about justice and survival. Because when Marcus finds out Ronan is alive, and he will find out eventually, he'll come for us. The only way we survive is if we strike first. This is madness. Maybe. But it's also the truth. And I'm betting that matters to someone. Sarah looked out over the forest, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke. I need proof. Real proof. Not just the word of a pregnant Omega and a man with no memory. Then help me get it. Mora said there are ways to verify bloodline, old rituals, tests that can't be faked. The Bloodstone, Sarah said slowly. It's in the Thornhaven archives. Or it was, before the Civil War. They say it glows when touched by Ashborn blood, but even if it still exists, Marcus would have destroyed it. Too much risk leaving evidence around. Maybe. Or maybe he kept it as a trophy. Proof of his victory over his brother. Lyra's mind raced. Either way, we need to get into Thornhaven. We need to find that stone. That's suicide. The Shadow Guard patrols every entrance. Marcus's loyalists control the city. And even if you somehow got in, the palace is a fortress. Good thing we know someone who used to live there, Lyra said. Someone who might remember secret passages, hidden routes. Sarah's eyes widened. You're serious about this? I'm pregnant with the child of a king. Marcus will kill me and my baby just for existing. So yes, I'm serious. The question is whether you'll help us. Sarah was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful. I'll need to talk to Garrett. This isn't just my decision. But Lyra, if we do this, there's no going back. You understand that? I understand. No going back has been my reality since the day I walked into that auction. I'm used to it. Garrett called a secret council 3 days later. Just him, Sarah, Ronan, and Lyra, meeting in a cave system deep in Blackridge territory where sound wouldn't carry. Lyra laid out everything, Mora's revelation, the evidence of royal blood, the threat Marcus posed, and the slim chance they had of exposing the truth. Garrett listened without interruption, his alpha instincts reading the currents beneath her words. When she finished, he turned to Ronan. Is it true? Are you King Darius? I don't know, Ronan said honestly. My memories are fragments, pieces that might fit the story Lyra's telling, or might be wishful thinking from a man desperate to be someone who matters. Show me your wolf, Garrett demanded. Ronan's eyes narrowed. Why? Because the Ashbourne line is famous for one thing above all else. Their wolves are marked. A crescent of white fur on the chest, shaped like a thorn crown. It's in every historical text, every painting. If you're truly Darius, you'll bear that mark. The cave went silent. Lyra held her breath as Ronan stood, moving to the center of the space. His shift flowed over him like dark water, bones restructuring, fur erupting, until his massive wolf form stood before them. And there, stark against his midnight black chest, was a crescent of pure white fur. Sarah made a sound like a sob. Garrett dropped to one knee. Your Majesty, the Blackridge Alpha said, his voice rough with emotion. Thornhaven has waited for your return. Ronan shifted back, looking shaken. Don't kneel to me. I'm not your king. I'm not anyone's king. You are whether you remember it or not, Garrett said, standing. And Lyra's right. Marcus will come for you, for her, for anyone who knows the truth. We need to move first. How? Ronan demanded. I have no army, no resources. What you're suggesting is exactly what I was trained for, Sarah interrupted. My mother was part of the Thornhaven resistance. She died fighting Marcus's coup, but before she died, she made sure I knew the city's secrets, the ways in and out. The loyalists who remain hidden. If we're going to do this, we need to contact them. Build a coalition. That takes time, Lyra said. Time we might not have. Marcus's spies could already know about Ronan. We need leverage now. Then we steal it, Ronan said, and something in his voice had changed. Harder, more certain. The Bloodstone. We get in, we get proof, and we use it to force Marcus to the negotiating table. Or we expose him publicly and let the Council of Fangs strip his claim. That's insane, Garrett said. You're talking about infiltrating the most heavily guarded fortress in the Shadowlands. I'm talking about taking back what's mine. Ronan's eyes blazed with an intensity Lyra had never seen before. I remember the passages now, the hidden ways. I built half of them myself, paranoid about assassination even before Marcus proved me right. If anyone can get in unseen, it's me. Not alone, Lyra said immediately. Absolutely alone. You're pregnant, Lyra. I'm not risking our child, she interrupted. This baby deserves to be born into a world where their father isn't hunted, where their mother isn't looking over her shoulder every day. I'm going with you. No. Yes. She stood, meeting his glare with her own stubborn determination. You taught me to fight, remember? Those months of training so I could defend myself. And I'm small, quiet. I can go places you can't. You need me, Ronan. Admit it. The struggle played out across his face. The king who commanded versus the man who cared. Finally, he closed his eyes. If anything happens to you, then you'll avenge me spectacularly and write sad songs about it later. But nothing's going to happen because we're going to be smart, careful, and together. Sarah stepped forward. I'm coming too. I know the resistance contacts, and you'll need a guide who remembers the city as it is now, not as it was 5 years ago. Garrett nodded slowly. I'll provide a distraction, a trade delegation from Blackridge arriving with gifts for the usurper king. It'll draw Marcus's attention and thin his guard presence. You'll have maybe 6 hours before they realize something's wrong. 6 hours to break into a palace, find a legendary artifact, and get out alive, Ronan said. Seems reasonable. Despite everything, Lyra laughed. When you put it that way, what could go wrong? They spent 2 weeks preparing. Ronan's memories continued to surface, triggered by maps and Sarah's descriptions of Thornhaven. He drew detailed layouts of the palace, marking secret passages and weak points in the defenses. Garrett assembled his most trusted wolves for the trade delegation, choosing those who could fight if needed but wouldn't break under pressure. And Lyra trained. Despite her pregnancy, now 4 months along, she pushed her body to its limits, learning stealth movement, lockpicking, and what Sarah called diplomatic lying, the art of seeming harmless while gathering intelligence. The night before they left, Ronan found her sitting outside their cabin, staring at the stars. Having second thoughts? He asked, settling beside her. Hundreds, but I'm still going. I know, That's what terrifies me. He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. Lyra, if this goes wrong, it won't. But if it does, I need you to promise me something. Promise you'll run. Take the baby and go as far from Thornhaven as you can. Find a pack that will take you in. Live. I'm not making that promise. Lyra, no. She turned to face him fully. Because if this goes wrong, if you fall, I'm not running. I'm finishing what we started. This baby deserves to know their father was a king who fought for what was right, and I deserve to be more than a survivor. I want to be someone who stood and fought back. He stared at her for a long moment, then pulled her into his arms. When did you become so fierce? The day you showed me I could be. She rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Ronan, regardless of what happens tomorrow, I need you to know something. This bargain we made, child for freedom, it stopped being about that a long time ago. At least for me. For me too, he said quietly. You were supposed to be a transaction, a way to earn my liberty. Instead, you became the reason I want to live. The reason I'm willing to fight for a throne I don't even remember wanting. Is that a confession, Your Majesty? It's the truth. He tilted her chin up, and in the starlight, his eyes were molten silver. I love you, Lyra Vance. And when this is over, when we've won or lost or ended up somewhere in between, I'm going to ask you to stay. Not because of a bargain, but because I can't imagine a future without you in it. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I love you too, which is probably the stupidest thing I've ever admitted, considering where we're going tomorrow. Probably, he agreed. Then he kissed her, tender and desperate, and full of promises they might not live to keep. The journey to Thornhaven took 5 days, traveling with Garrett's delegation to maintain the appearance of a legitimate trade mission. Lyra rode in a covered wagon, her pregnancy hidden beneath loose robes, while Ronan and Sarah moved as hired guards among Blackridge's warriors. As they approached the city, Lyra got her first glimpse of the Obsidian Throne's seat of power, and her breath caught. Thornhaven rose from the mountainside like a crown of stone and shadow. Black granite walls climbed toward the sky, studded with towers that seemed to pierce the clouds. The palace itself dominated the skyline, a massive structure of dark stone and darker glass, with banners bearing Marcus's new sigil, a broken crown beneath a blood-red moon. It's beautiful, she whispered. It's a prison, Ronan said grimly. I remember now. Every stone, every corridor, and I remember what I built it to be, a fortress for my people, a symbol of strength protecting the weak. Marcus has turned it into a monument to his own ego. Garrett's delegation was admitted after thorough inspection. They were housed in guest quarters in the lower city, far from the palace but close enough for their purposes. That night, while Garrett and his wolves made a show of settling in, Ronan, Lyra, and Sarah slipped away into the shadows. The passage Ronan led them to was hidden behind a false wall in an abandoned smithy. It wound through the mountain itself, narrow and suffocating, lit only by the small light stone Sarah carried. They walked for what felt like hours, climbing steadily upward. This leads directly into the archive vault, Ronan explained in a whisper. I designed it as an escape route if the palace ever fell. Ironic that I'm using it to break in. They emerged into dusty darkness. Ronan gestured for silence, and they waited, listening. No guards, no movement. Sarah's light revealed rows of shelves packed with scrolls, books, and artifact cases. The bloodstone should be in the central display, Ronan said, if Marcus kept it. They found it in a locked case of black iron and glass, a fist-sized crystal that seemed to drink in Sarah's light rather than reflect it. Ronan approached slowly, reverently. The moment his fingers touched the glass, the stone began to glow. First faint, like a guttering candle, then brighter. Brighter still, until the entire vault was bathed in crimson light that pulsed in time with Ronan's heartbeat. It's true, Sarah breathed. You're really him. But they had no time to celebrate. Alarms began to shriek throughout the palace. Shouts echoed down corridors. The sound of running feet grew closer. They know we're here, Lyra said. Ronan grabbed the case, smashing the glass with his elbow. The bloodstone tumbled into his hand, blazing brighter at his touch. Back to the passage. Now! They ran. Behind them, doors burst open. Shadow Guard warriors poured into the vault, their armor black as midnight, their blades singing as they cleared scabbards. "Stop them!" The voice was cold, commanding. "The king wants them alive!" Ronan shoved Lyra and Sarah toward the passage entrance. "Go! I'll hold them!" "We're not leaving you!" Lyra grabbed his arm. You're carrying my child. That makes you more important than anything. Run, Lyra. Run and don't look back." But before she could argue, one of the Shadow Guard, faster than the others, more skilled, broke through Ronan's defenses and drove a blade toward his heart. Ronan twisted, taking the strike in his side instead. He roared in pain and rage, his shift rippling over him, and his massive wolf form crashed into the attacker with bone-shattering force. The passage entrance was right there, 10 feet away. Freedom. Lyra made her choice. She ran, but not toward the passage, toward Ronan, toward the fight. She grabbed a fallen sword, heavier than anything she'd trained with, and swung it at the nearest guard with all her desperate strength. The blade connected. The guard fell. And in that moment, everything changed. From deeper in the palace, a presence approached, vast, suffocating, radiating alpha power that made even Ronan's wolf form seem small. The Shadow Guard warriors fell back, dropping to their knees. A man emerged from the darkness. He looked like Ronan, same height, same build, same gray eyes. But where Ronan's scars told stories of honor, this man's face was a mask of cold ambition. He wore a crown of black iron, twisted into the shape of thorns. Marcus Ashbourne, the usurper king. "Hello, brother," Marcus said, his voice smooth as poisoned honey. "I've been expecting you." Ronan's wolf form shifted back to human in a ripple of muscle and bone, blood streaming from the wound in his side. He stood between Marcus and Lyra, naked and defiant, the bloodstone still clutched in his hand and blazing like a captured star. "You should have stayed lost, brother," Marcus said, his tone almost sympathetic. "I gave you mercy once. I could have killed you. Instead, I let you wander free, stripped of everything that made you dangerous. That was kindness." Kindness. Ronan's voice was rough with pain and rage. "You call stealing my memories, my throne, my life, kindness? I call it necessity. You were weak, Darius, soft. You built this kingdom on principles of protection and fairness, but you forgot the first rule of survival. Strength is all that matters. The packs don't need a shepherd. They need a wolf." Lyra felt Sarah's hand on her arm, pulling her back toward the passage, but she shook it off. The bloodstone's light was doing something, spreading through the vault, seeping into the walls themselves. And where the light touched, the stone began to glow with responding radiance. Marcus noticed it too. His eyes narrowed. "Clever, using the resonance effect, but it won't save you. The Shadow Guard answers to me now. The packs bow to my rule. You're just a ghost, brother, and ghosts can't hold thrones." "Maybe not alone." The voice came from the vault entrance, Garrett, flanked by 20 Blackridge warriors. "But a living king with allies? That's a different story." Behind them, more wolves appeared. Not Blackridge this time, but strangers wearing different pack colors. Sarah gasped in recognition. "The resistance," she whispered. "They came." Marcus's confident smile faltered for the first time. "This changes nothing. You're surrounded. One word from me and 200 Shadow Guard will flood this room." "Then give the word," Ronan said quietly. "Let's see how many of them still remember their true oaths, because that stone in my hand, it's not just proof of bloodline, it's a key." He raised the bloodstone higher, and the light intensified. Throughout the palace, Lyra heard something shift, a deep, resonant hum that made the floor vibrate beneath her feet. Ancient mechanisms, dormant for 5 years, grinding back to life. "What did you do?" Marcus demanded. "I activated the throne's defense protocol, something only Ashbourne blood can trigger." Ronan's smile was sharp as broken glass. "You've been sitting on my seat for 5 years, Marcus, but the palace never accepted you. It was waiting, and now it knows its true king has returned." The walls began to glow with the same crimson light as the bloodstone. Symbols carved into the stone, so old they'd faded to invisibility, now blazed like fresh brands. And from deeper in the palace came a sound that made Marcus's face go pale. The howling of wolves, hundreds of them. The ghost song of every Ashbourne king and queen who'd ever held the throne, preserved in the stone itself as a final safeguard against usurpers. The Shadow Guard warriors backed away from the sound, their discipline cracking. Some dropped to their knees. Others simply fled. The spectral howling grew louder, more insistent, until it seemed the entire mountain was crying out in recognition. Marcus snarled, his own shift beginning to take him. "If I can't have the throne, neither will you. I'll bring this whole palace down first." But before he could complete the transformation, Lyra moved. She'd been inching forward during the confrontation, using the chaos as cover, and now she was close enough. The sword she'd taken from the fallen guard was heavy and unfamiliar, but her hands were steady as she pressed the blade against Marcus's throat. "Don't," she said, her voice cutting through the howling. "Don't make me kill the father of my child's uncle." Marcus froze. His eyes found hers, and she saw genuine surprise there. "You're pregnant." 4 months, with the heir to the obsidian throne. She let that sink in. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to call off your guards. You're going to submit to the Council of Fangs for judgment, and in exchange, I'll ask Ronan to show you the mercy you never showed him. Exile instead of execution, life instead of death." "Why would you do that?" "Because I'm not you, and neither is he." She nodded toward Ronan. "We don't rule through fear and blood. We rule through strength tempered with justice. That's what makes us different. That's what makes us worthy." The vault had gone silent except for the spectral howling and the ragged breathing of wounded wolves. Every eye was on Lyra, this small, pregnant Omega holding a blade to the throat of a false king. Marcus's laugh was bitter. "You think the Pax will accept you? A rejected Omega as queen? They'll tear you apart the moment Darius's back is turned." "Then they'll have to go through me first," Garrett said, stepping forward. "Blackridge Pack recognizes the true king, and his queen." "As does the Thornhaven Resistance," one of the strange wolves added, removing his hood to reveal an old man with scars that mapped decades of warfare. "I'm Commander Hale. I served under King Darius before the betrayal. I've waited 5 years for this moment." One by one, the assembled wolves dropped to one knee, not in submission, but in recognition, in choice. Even some of Marcus's own shadow guard, their faces twisted with shame and relief, joined them. Marcus sagged in Lyra's grip, the fight draining out of him. "You won. I see that now. But Darius, brother, you have to understand. I did what I thought was necessary. The packs were fracturing. Border wars were escalating. Your compassion was going to get us all killed." Ronan moved closer, his wound still bleeding, but his bearing that of a king. "So you decided murder and tyranny were better solutions?" "You're right about one thing, Marcus. The Pax need strength, but strength without honor is just savagery, and I will not let Thornhaven become that." "What happens to me?" Ronan looked to Lyra, letting her make the call. She met his eyes and saw trust there. Partnership. Love. He was giving her this choice because her voice mattered, because she was more than just the mother of his heir. "Exile," she said finally, lowering the sword. "You leave Thornhaven tonight. You go far enough that your shadow never falls on this kingdom again. And if you ever return, if you ever threaten Ronan or our child, the mercy ends. Understood?" Marcus stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Understood." He looked at Ronan. "She's stronger than you know, brother. Don't waste that." "I won't." 2 resistance fighters escorted Marcus from the vault. Lyra watched him go. This man who'd stolen a kingdom and lost it in a single night. She felt no triumph, only exhaustion and a fierce protectiveness for the life growing inside her. Ronan was beside her in an instant, his hands gentle on her shoulders. That was incredibly brave and incredibly stupid. "I've been told I have a talent for both." She touched his wounded side and her fingers came away bloody. "We need to get you to a healer. We need to secure the palace first. There will be loyalists, holdouts. This isn't over." Commander Hale stepped forward. "Your Majesty, with your permission, my forces will handle the cleanup. You need medical attention, and your queen needs rest." The word hung in the air. Queen. Lyra almost laughed at the absurdity of it. 3 months ago, she'd been a rejected Omega with no future. Now she stood in the heart of the Obsidian Throne's palace, surrounded by wolves calling her royalty. "I'm not queen," she said. "We're not even mated properly. You're the woman who bought a king when he had nothing, who risked everything to help him reclaim what was stolen, who held a blade to a usurper's throat while 4 months pregnant. Hale's grizzled face split into a rare smile. If that doesn't make you a queen, I don't know what does. Ronan turned her to face him, his gray eyes blazing with intensity. He's right. I don't remember much of my time as king, but I remember this. The crown is nothing without someone worthy to share it with. Lyra Vance, you've been my partner, my strength, my reason to fight. I'm asking you now, before witnesses, before the pack, will you be my queen? Not because of our bargain, but because I love you and I can't imagine ruling without you? Lyra's vision blurred with tears. That's not fair. You know I'm emotional when I'm pregnant. Is that a yes? It's a, you're an idiot if you think I'd say anything else. She pulled him down for a kiss, tasting blood and salt and victory. Yes, Ronan Ashbourne, Darius, whatever name you choose. Yes, I'll be your queen. The assembled wolves erupted in howls of approval. The spectral song from the palace walls rose in harmony, as if the stones themselves were celebrating. And for the first time since she'd walked into that frontier auction, Lyra felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. She felt like she belonged. The next weeks were a controlled chaos of restoration and revelation. Ronan's memories continued to return in fragments, triggered by familiar corridors and loyal faces. He remembered battles, treaties, the weight of responsibility, but he also remembered joy, festivals in the courtyard, children playing in the palace gardens, the sound of his people singing. Lyra stood beside him through it all, learning to navigate the complex politics of pack leadership. She met with the displaced families whose homes had been confiscated by Marcus's regime. She negotiated with neighboring territories whose borders had been violated. And slowly, grudgingly, the packs began to accept her. Not because she was Omega, not because she was pregnant, but because she listened. Because she remembered what it felt like to be powerless and refused to let others suffer the same fate. Sarah became her advisor and friend, teaching her the intricacies of pack law and helping her understand the web of alliances that held the kingdom together. Garrett returned to Blackridge as a formal ally, his pack status elevated by their early support of the true king. And Cain? He appeared at the palace gates 4 weeks after Ronan's coronation, his head bowed in submission. I was wrong, he said simply. About you, about him, about everything. I let my pride and my fear make me cruel. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry. Lyra studied the wolf who'd tried to kill her, who'd attacked their home, who'd represented everything she feared about pack mentality. She could have him exiled, imprisoned, executed for his crimes. Instead, she said, you can earn forgiveness, not through words, but through action. Garrett tells me you've been volunteering in the reconstruction efforts in Blackridge. Keep doing that. Help rebuild what you tried to tear down. Maybe someday we'll both believe you've changed. Cain looked up, shock written across his scarred features. You're giving me a chance? Everyone deserves a chance to be better. Even you. Don't waste it. He left with tears in his eyes, and Lyra felt Ronan's hand slip into hers. You're kinder than I would have been, he said. Maybe. But kindness is a strength too. You taught me that. The formal coronation was held on the first day of spring, 5 months after Lyra had walked into that auction. She stood in the great hall of the Obsidian Palace, her pregnancy now visible beneath the flowing silver gown Sarah had commissioned. Ronan wore the crown of thorns, but somehow it looked different now. Not a symbol of suffering, but of resilience. The Council of Fangs presided, 5 ancient alphas representing the oldest pack bloodlines. They'd investigated Marcus's betrayal, verified Ronan's identity through the Bloodstone and a dozen other tests, and formally recognized his claim to the throne. Darius Ashbourne, the head counselor, intoned, you have proven your blood right and your worthiness to rule. But kingship is not complete without partnership. You have named a queen to stand beside you. Does the council recognize this claim? This was the moment Lyra had been dreading. Omega queens were rare in pack history, usually chosen for political alliances, not because a king actually wanted them. The council could reject her, could demand Ronan choose a born alpha, someone with connections and power. The head counselor's ancient eyes studied her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. Lyra Vance, rejected by Silverpaw for perceived weakness, purchased by a king who recognized your true strength. You have survived the wilderness, defended your mate against overwhelming odds, shown mercy to enemies, and begun the work of healing a fractured kingdom. He paused. The council recognizes you as Queen of Thornhaven. May your reign be long and your wisdom deep. The hall erupted in cheers. Ronan pulled her close, and she felt his lips brush her ear. "Thank you," he whispered, "for seeing me when I was nothing, for betting everything on a broken man. Thank you for proving I chose well." The celebration lasted 3 days. Delegations from every major pack brought gifts and pledges of loyalty. Old grievances were aired and resolved. New treaties were signed. And through it all, Lyra felt the baby moving inside her, strong kicks that reminded her why all this mattered. On the 4th night, exhausted and overwhelmed, she retreated to the royal chambers, a vast suite that still felt foreign despite weeks of living there. She stood on the balcony, looking out over the city that was now hers to protect, and felt Ronan's arms encircle her from behind. "Regretting your choice?" he asked. "Which choice? Buying you? Loving you? Becoming queen? There are so many to regret." She felt him smile against her hair. "Any of them." "Not one, though I reserve the right to complain loudly when this baby decides 3 a.m. is the perfect time for acrobatics." "Fair enough." He turned her to face him. "I have something for you. I wanted to wait until we were alone." He pulled a small wooden box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a ring, simple silver carved with intricate wolf designs, with a single red stone at its center. "This was my mother's," he said softly. "One of the few things Marcus didn't destroy. It's meant to be worn by the Queen of Thornhaven as a symbol of her bond with the king, not ownership, partnership." He slipped it onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. "Lyra Vance, who became Lyra Ashbourne, who will become the mother of my child and hopefully the love of my very long life. Will you wear this? Will you stay, even though our bargain is fulfilled?" The bargain. She'd almost forgotten. A child for his freedom. She was pregnant. He was free. By the terms of their original agreement, they owed each other nothing now. "The bargain was fulfilled the moment I fell in love with you," she said. "Everything after that has been choice. And I choose you, Ronan, every day. For all the days we have." He kissed her then, deep and desperate and full of promises. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Lyra laughed. "What's funny?" he asked. "I was just thinking about the auctioneer, that greasy man who sold you to me for 25 silver. Wouldn't he lose his mind if he knew he'd sold a king for the price of a decent horse?" 25 silver was a bargain, Ronan agreed, though I cost significantly more in trouble. Worth every coin and every moment of terror. They stood together on the balcony as night deepened over Thornhaven, two survivors who'd found each other in the darkest circumstances and built something extraordinary from desperation and hope. Below them, the city glowed with lamplight. Above them, stars wheeled across an infinite sky. Somewhere in the darkness, Marcus Ashbourne was beginning his exile, stripped of power and purpose. Cain was working to redeem himself in Blackridge territory. The packs were learning to trust again. And inside Lyra, a child grew, the next generation of a bloodline that had survived betrayal and loss to rise again. But all of that was tomorrow's concern. Tonight, there was just this. A king and queen standing together, the ring on her finger catching starlight, and the certain knowledge that whatever challenges came next, they would face them as they'd faced everything else, together. The baby kicked hard, making Lyra gasp and laugh. Ronan's hand immediately went to her stomach, his scarred palm covering the swell of their child. "Strong," he said with satisfaction. "Like her mother. Or him, could be a boy. Either way, strong." He rested his forehead against hers. "Thank you for this. For them. For everything. Thank you for being worth 25 silver and a lifetime of adventure." From the great hall below, music drifted up, wolves celebrating their king's return and the promise of a new era. Tomorrow, Ronan would hold his first official court as restored king. Tomorrow, Lyra would meet with the displaced families and begin implementing the reforms she'd been planning. Tomorrow, the real work of rebuilding a kingdom would begin. But tonight, they simply stood together and let themselves feel the weight of impossible victory. A rejected Omega and a lost king who'd found each other in the worst place at the worst time and somehow managed to build a future anyway. The moon rose higher, full and bright, casting silver light across the obsidian palace. And in that light, Lyra could see the future stretching ahead, difficult, uncertain, but theirs to shape. She thought about the woman she'd been 3 months ago, standing in that frontier fortress with her last coins and her desperate plan. That woman would have never believed this ending was possible. That woman could barely imagine surviving another week. But that woman had made the bravest choice of her life. She'd bought a stranger and trusted her instincts. She'd walked into the wilderness and refused to give up. She'd loved a broken man and helped him remember he was a king. And now, standing in a palace that was hers by choice and right, carrying the heir to an ancient throne, Lyra Ashbourne finally understood what she'd been searching for all along. Not acceptance from those who'd rejected her, not revenge on those who'd hurt her, not even safety, though she had that now. What she'd been searching for was this: the freedom to choose her own path, the strength to stand beside someone as an equal, the courage to build something new from the ashes of what had been destroyed. She'd bought a man at auction with 25 silver in desperation. What she'd actually purchased was her own future, and the power to shape it however she chose. Below in the courtyard, wolves howled in celebration. Inside the palace, loyal subjects prepared for tomorrow's challenges. And in Lyra's womb, a child, a prince or princess who would grow up knowing their mother had been strong enough to save a kingdom, kicked and turned and grew. Ronan pulled her closer, and she let herself sink into his warmth. Tomorrow would bring its trials. Tonight was for this, for love, for victory, for the impossible made real. "Come to bed," Ronan murmured. "You need rest. The baby needs rest. In a minute. I'm not quite ready to let this moment go. Then I'll wait with you, always." They stood together as the celebration continued below, two survivors watching over a kingdom they'd fought to reclaim, holding tight to the future they'd built from nothing but courage and stubborn hope. And in the distance, beyond the city walls, the wilderness stretched dark and vast, the same wilderness where their story had begun, where a desperate Omega had made a bargain with a lost stranger, where survival had transformed into something far greater. The frontier was behind them now, but its lessons remained carved into their bones. Stay strong. Trust yourself. Fight for what matters. And sometimes, just sometimes, the most desperate gamble can lead to the most extraordinary victory. The wilderness was still there, dark and unchanging beyond the palace walls. But Lyra had changed. Everything had changed. She woke 3 hours before dawn to the baby kicking hard against her ribs and the sound of urgent voices outside the royal chambers. Ronan was already dressed, his expression grim as he listened to Commander Hale speak in low, clipped tones. "What's wrong?" Lyra asked, pushing herself upright with effort. 7 months pregnant now, and every movement required strategy. "Marcus is back," Ronan said flatly. "With an army." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Lyra felt ice flood her veins. That's impossible. The exile terms were apparently suggestions he chose to ignore. Hale's weathered face was tight with anger. He's been gathering forces in the Shadowlands, disaffected wolves, rogues, anyone with a grudge against the new regime. They crossed into Thornhaven territory 2 hours ago, 500 strong, maybe more. Lyra's hand went instinctively to her stomach. The baby kicked again, as if sensing her fear. "How long until they reach the city?" 3 days. Maybe 4 if we're lucky." Ronan was already moving, pulling on his armor with practiced efficiency. "Hale, mobilize the garrison. Get word to Garrett and the allied packs. We need every warrior we can muster." "Already done, Your Majesty. But even with our allies, we're looking at 300 against 500. The numbers aren't good." "Then we make up for it in strategy." Ronan turned to Lyra, and she saw the conflict in his eyes. The king who needed to lead his army, and the man who wanted to protect his pregnant mate. "I need you to evacuate to the mountain fortress. You and the other non-combatants. It's defensible, and if we fall, no." The word came out harder than she intended. "I'm not running, not again." "Lyra, you're 7 months pregnant. This isn't about courage, it's about what kind of queen I want to be." She stood using his bedpost for support and met his gaze with steel in her own. "You think the people will follow a queen who abandons them the moment danger arrives. You think they'll trust me to lead if my first instinct is to hide? I think they'll understand that protecting the heir is paramount. The heir will be fine, but the kingdom needs to see that their queen stands with them, that she doesn't treat them as expendable shields for her own comfort. She moved closer, placing her hand over his heart. Ronan, I know you're afraid for us. I'm afraid too, but running won't save us. If Marcus wins, he'll hunt us down wherever we hide. The only way we survive is if we win, together. The conflict played out across his face. King versus husband, duty versus love. Finally, he closed his eyes. You're going to be the death of me. Or the making of you. We'll find out which. She softened her tone. I won't be on the front lines. I'm not stupid, but I can coordinate supplies, manage the civilians, keep the city functioning while you fight. That's not nothing, Ronan. That's what queens do. Hale cleared his throat. If I may, Your Majesty, the queen is right. The people need visible leadership from both of you. It's how you build loyalty that lasts beyond a single battle. Ronan looked between them, then surrendered with a reluctant nod. Fine. But you stay within the inner walls. And Sarah stays with you at all times as your personal guard. Agreed? Agreed. The next 72 hours were a controlled storm of preparation. Lyra threw herself into organizing the city's defenses with the same fierce determination she'd once applied to surviving in the wilderness. She wasn't a warrior, but she understood logistics. She understood people. And she understood that battles were won as much by supply lines and morale as by swords and claws. She coordinated food distribution, ensuring the garrison was well fed and the civilians rationed properly. She worked with the healers to set up triage stations and stockpile medical supplies. She walked the streets despite her swollen ankles and aching back, stopping to speak with frightened families, offering reassurance she didn't entirely feel. And at night, she held Ronan while he planned his defense, offering insights from an Omega's perspective that his military advisors often missed. The Eastern approach, she said on the second night, studying the maps spread across their war table. Marcus will expect you to fortify the main gates in the southern pass, but what about the eastern cliffs? The ones you said were unclimbable? They are unclimbable. Sheer rock face, 300 feet straight down. For humans, maybe, but skilled climbers, wolves in shifted form with the right equipment, she traced the cliff line with her finger. If I were Marcus, I'd send a strike team up that face while you're focused on the obvious approaches. Get inside the walls, open the gates from within. Ronan stared at the map, then at her. That's actually brilliant and terrifying. How did you think of that? Because that's exactly the kind of impossible solution I'd use if I were desperate enough. And Marcus is very desperate. She smiled grimly. You're not the only one who learned to think tactically from surviving impossible situations. He stationed 50 of his best warriors on the eastern cliffs. It would prove to be the decision that saved the city. On the third day, Marcus's army arrived. They came at dawn, a tide of wolves and rogues that seemed to swallow the horizon. From the palace walls, Lyra watched them assemble, her heart hammering against her ribs. So many. Too many. Ronan stood beside her, his hand finding hers. It's not too late to evacuate. Yes, it is. We're committed now. She squeezed his fingers. Go be the king they need. I'll be the queen they deserve. He kissed her then, deep and desperate, as if he could pour all his fear and love into that single moment. When they broke apart, both had tears in their eyes. Come back to me, she whispered. Always. And Lyra? He placed his hand on her swollen belly. Tell our child I fought for their future, whatever happens. Then he was gone, racing down to join his warriors, and Lyra was left standing on the wall, watching the man she loved prepare to risk everything. The battle began an hour later with a thunderous clash of bodies and steel. Marcus had divided his forces, sending waves of attackers against the main gates while holding his elite fighters in reserve. It was a grinding, brutal assault designed to exhaust Ronan's defenders before the real attack came. Lyra watched from her command post in the inner courtyard, receiving reports from runners and making decisions that felt impossibly weighty. Send reinforcements to the south gate where the assault was heaviest. Redirect the healers to the west wall where the casualties were mounting. Keep the civilians calm even as the sounds of battle echoed through the streets. Sarah stood beside her, a constant presence, ready to fight if the inner defenses fell. But her eyes were sharp, reading the battlefield with a veteran's understanding. "He's holding back his best fighters," Sarah observed, waiting for something. "The eastern cliffs," Lyra said immediately. "He's going to try it, just like I thought." "We should warn." "No. Ronan already has people there. If we pull warriors from the main gates to reinforce the cliffs, Marcus will see it and adjust his strategy. We have to trust the plan." It was the hardest thing she'd ever done, standing still while her instincts screamed to act. But she'd learned something from surviving the wilderness. Sometimes the strongest choice was patience. The sun climbed higher, the battle raged on, and then, just as Lyra had predicted, the eastern alarm bells began to ring. "They're on the cliffs," a runner gasped, sliding into the courtyard. 50 climbers, maybe more. They're halfway up." "Our defenders?" Lyra demanded. "Holding position as ordered, waiting until they're committed to the climb." Lyra closed her eyes, calculating. Marcus's climbers were vulnerable now, halfway up a sheer rock face, unable to fight effectively or retreat quickly. If Ronan's warriors struck now, "Tell Commander Hale to spring the trap. Now!" The runner sprinted away. Minutes crawled past like hours. Then, from the eastern wall, she heard it. Screams. The sound of bodies falling. The desperate howls of wolves caught in an ambush they'd never seen coming. Marcus's strike team was destroyed before they reached the top of the cliff. And with them went his best chance of breaking through the inner defenses. The tide of battle began to turn. Ronan fought like a force of nature, his massive wolf form tearing through enemy lines with brutal efficiency. But he fought with control now, with purpose. Not the berserker rage of a survivor, but the calculated precision of a king defending his people. Around him, the Thornhaven garrison rallied, finding strength in their leader's unwavering presence. By midday, Marcus's assault had stalled. His warriors were exhausted, their numbers thinned by hours of grinding combat. And when Garrett arrived with 200 Blackridge reinforcements, moving faster than anyone had expected, the mathematics of battle shifted decisively. Marcus himself appeared at the main gates, shifted to human form, his voice magically amplified to carry across the battlefield. "Darius, brother, end this madness. Come out and face me. Just you and me. Winner takes the throne. No more bloodshed." The fighting paused. All eyes turned to the palace, waiting for the king's response. Lyra felt her blood run cold. It was a trap. Had to be. Marcus wouldn't challenge Ronan to single combat unless he had an advantage, poison on his blades, hidden archers. Something. But she also knew Ronan would accept, because that's who he was. A king who put his people before his own safety. She was running before she'd consciously decided to move, Sarah cursing behind her as she raced through the palace corridors, down to the main gate where Ronan stood surrounded by his advisors. "Don't!" she gasped, reaching him, her pregnant belly making her breathless. "Don't accept. It's a trap." "I know," Ronan said quietly. "But if I refuse, he'll call me a coward. He'll say I hide behind my warriors while they die for me. The challenge has been issued publicly. I have to answer." "Then I'm coming with you." "Absolutely not. Not to fight. As a witness. Marcus wants single combat? Fine. But it happens under formal rules, witnessed by representatives from all the major packs. No tricks. No hidden advantages. Just two wolves and the truth." She grabbed his arm, forcing him to meet her eyes. "You taught me that strength comes in many forms. Let me use mine." He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Hale, send runners to the pack representatives. Tell them we accept the challenge under council rules. Full witnesses. Formal combat." An hour later, they assembled in the killing ground between the city walls and Marcus's army, a cleared space that had seen too much blood already. Representatives from 5 major packs formed a circle. Garrett for Blackridge, Commander Hale for Thornhaven's Old Guard, and 3 neutral alphas summoned from nearby territories, and Lyra, standing as Queen's witness, her pregnant belly prominent, her hand resting on Sarah's shoulder for support. Marcus stood across from Ronan, and Lyra saw something in his eyes that made her stomach clench. Desperation. Madness. The look of a man who'd lost everything and had nothing left to lose. "The challenge is accepted," one of the neutral alphas declared. "Single combat, shifted form, to submission or death." Begin. The two brothers transformed simultaneously, their wolves erupting into being, Ronan's midnight black with the white crescent on his chest, Marcus's charcoal gray with eyes like poisoned gold. They circled each other, and the entire battlefield held its breath. Marcus struck first, fast and brutal, going for Ronan's throat, but Ronan was ready, twisting aside and raking claws across Marcus's flank. Blood splattered the dirt. The crowd roared. They clashed again and again, two massive wolves tearing at each other with savage intensity. Marcus fought with the fury of desperation, all offense and no defense. Ronan fought with controlled precision, looking for openings, conserving his strength. And slowly, inevitably, Ronan began to win. A devastating bite to Marcus's shoulder. A perfectly timed slash that opened a deep wound in his side. Marcus was bleeding from a dozen injuries now, his movements slowing, his breathing labored. But he didn't submit. Even when it was clear he'd lost, even when continued fighting meant death, he kept coming. Because submission meant admitting he'd been wrong, meant accepting that the throne was never his to take. Ronan backed away, shifting to human form, his body covered in blood, some his own, most Marcus's. Yield, brother. Please, this doesn't have to end with your death. Marcus shifted back, swaying on his feet, his face a mask of blood and fury. I won't yield to you. I won't let you. He collapsed mid-sentence, his body finally giving out. The crowd surged forward, but Lyra was faster. She pushed through the witnesses, falling to her knees beside Marcus despite her pregnancy, her healer's instincts overriding everything else. He's dying, she said, looking up at Ronan. The blood loss. His wounds are too severe. Then let him die. The words came from somewhere in the crowd, one of Marcus's own supporters, disgusted by his failure. No, Lyra's voice rang out clear and strong. No one else dies today. We've had enough death, enough blood. She looked at the pack witnesses. I claim Queen's mercy. Marcus Ashbourne is defeated. His claim is forfeit. But his life is spared, and he receives the healing he needs to survive. That's not your right, one of the neutral alphas protested. Actually, it is. Ronan knelt beside her, his hand covering hers. Under the old laws, a queen can claim mercy for a defeated enemy once per reign. It's rarely invoked, but it's valid. He looked at Marcus's broken form. And I support her decision. Marcus, you were my brother before you were my enemy. I won't let you die in the dirt like a common criminal. Marcus's eyes found Lyra's, filled with confusion and something that might have been gratitude. Why? He rasped. Why save me? Because mercy is strength. Because my child deserves to grow up in a world where we break cycles of violence, not perpetuate them. And because despite everything you've done, you're still Ronan's brother. She nodded to the healers standing by. Take him, save him, and when he's strong enough, escort him to the border. His exile stands, but he leaves alive. The healers rushed forward, carefully lifting Marcus's broken body. As they carried him away, Lyra felt the baby kick hard, a sharp, insistent movement that made her gasp. Ronan's hand was on her stomach immediately. Are you all right? I think the baby's coming. The word sent a ripple of shock through the assembled witnesses. Sarah was beside her in an instant, her arm supporting Lyra's back. Now? You're choosing now? Sarah's voice was caught between exasperation and laughter. I don't think the baby consulted me on timing. Another contraction hit, sharper this time, and Lyra doubled over. Oh, that's definitely labor. The battlefield dissolved into organized chaos. Ronan scooped Lyra into his arms despite his wounds, carrying her toward the palace, while healers and attendants swarmed around them. The assembled armies, Marcus's remaining forces and Ronan's defenders, watched in stunned silence as their queen went into labor in the space between war and peace. This is insane, Ronan muttered, but his eyes were bright with fear and joy. You're insane. The most perfectly insane woman I've ever met. Flattery will get you nowhere. Just get me to the royal chambers before this baby decides to make an entrance in the middle of the courtyard. They made it. Barely. The royal chambers became a storm of activity. Healers checking Lyra's progress, Sarah barking orders, Ronan pacing like a caged wolf, while Lyra labored through contractions that seemed to tear her apart from the inside. Hours passed. The sun set. Darkness fell over Thornhaven, and still Lyra labored, her strength flagging, her body pushed beyond any limit she'd known. "I can't," she gasped during a particularly brutal contraction. "Ronan, I can't do this." He was beside her immediately, his hand gripping hers, his voice fierce in her ear. "Yes, you can. You bought a king with your last silver. You survived the wilderness. You stood against a usurper and won. You can do this, Lyra. You're the strongest person I've ever known." "I bought you for 25 silver. That's not even that much silver when you think about it." He laughed, the sound breaking through her pain. "Best investment you ever made." "Worst negotiation skills in history." "Push, Your Majesty," the head healer commanded. "The baby's crowning. One more push." Lyra pushed with everything she had left, every ounce of strength built from rejection and survival and stubborn refusal to give up. She pushed with the force of a woman who'd walked into a frontier auction with nothing and walked out with a future. She pushed with the power of love that had transformed a desperate bargain into a kingdom. And then, cutting through her own screams and the healer's urgent instructions, she heard it, a baby's cry, strong and fierce and unmistakably alive. "It's a girl," the healer announced, placing a squirming, blood-covered infant on Lyra's chest. A healthy, perfect girl. Lyra looked down at her daughter, at this tiny, wailing creature with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn gray like her father's. This child who'd been conceived in a wilderness cabin as part of a bargain and was now being born in a palace as the heir to a kingdom. "Hello, little one," Lyra whispered, her tears falling onto the baby's face. "You picked quite a day to arrive." Ronan was crying too, his scarred hands gentle as he touched his daughter's impossibly small fingers. "She's perfect. You're perfect. You're both perfect." The baby grabbed his finger with surprising strength, and Lyra saw something break open in Ronan's expression, all the walls he'd built around his heart crumbling in the face of this tiny, perfect life. "What do we name her?" he asked. Lyra looked at her daughter, this child born between war and peace, this symbol of everything they'd fought for. "Hope. We name her Hope Ashbourne, because that's what she represents. Hope for something better." "Hope Ashbourne," Ronan repeated, testing the name. Then he smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that transformed his scarred face. "Our daughter, the Princess of Thornhaven." Outside the palace, word spread through the city like wildfire. The queen had given birth. A princess was born. And somehow, impossibly, that tiny piece of news mattered more than the battle, more than the bloodshed, more than anything else. Because it meant the future was secured. The line would continue. Hope, both the abstract concept and the tiny, squalling infant, had arrived. 3 days later, they held a formal presentation in the Great Hall. Lyra stood beside Ronan, still recovering from childbirth but refusing to miss this moment. In her arms, Hope slept peacefully, wrapped in silver silk, oblivious to the significance of what was happening. The hall was packed. Pack representatives from across the territories, civilians from Thornhaven, allied wolves from Blackridge and beyond. Even a few of Marcus's former supporters, stripped of rank but allowed to witness this moment as a gesture of reconciliation. The head counselor stepped forward, his ancient voice carrying through the hall. "We gather today to recognize the birth of Princess Hope Ashbourne, heir to the Obsidian throne. Born in the space between war and peace, she represents the future we fight to build. A future where strength protects rather than destroys, where mercy is recognized as power, where even those rejected by their packs can rise to rule kingdoms." His eyes found Lyra's, and she saw approval there. Respect. "Queen Lyra Vance Ashbourne, you came to us as a rejected Omega with nothing but courage and determination. You chose a king when he was nothing. You stood beside him through battle and betrayal. You showed mercy to a defeated enemy. And you have given us an heir who will grow up knowing that her mother was strong enough to change the world." The hall erupted in howls of approval, not polite acknowledgement, but genuine celebration. These wolves, her wolves now, were accepting her not because she'd been chosen by a king, but because she'd proven herself worthy through action. Ronan took her hand, and together they raised hope above their heads, presenting her to the assembled packs. The howling intensified, a chorus of voices welcoming their princess into the world. And in that moment, holding her daughter high while her mate stood beside her and an entire kingdom celebrated, Lyra finally understood what she'd been searching for all along. Not redemption from those who'd rejected her. They didn't matter anymore. Not revenge on those who'd hurt her. She'd risen above them. Not even safety, though she had that now in abundance. What she'd found was purpose, partnership, a place where her strength, the Omega strength of compassion and strategic thinking and stubborn survival, was valued equally with Alpha power. She'd rewritten the story. A rejected Omega wasn't weak. A purchased stranger wasn't worthless. A desperate bargain wasn't shameful. Sometimes the most broken paths led to the most beautiful destinations. That night, after the celebrations had finally ended and the palace had settled into quiet, Lyra stood on the balcony with hope in her arms. Ronan joined her, his arm sliding around her waist, the three of them a unit watching the stars wheel overhead. "Do you ever regret it?" Lyra asked quietly. "That auction, the wilderness, all the struggle it took to get here?" Ronan was silent for a long moment, considering. "I regret the pain Marcus caused, the lives lost in his coup and the battle to reclaim the throne. But regret meeting you? Regret our daughter? Regret learning that I could be more than just a warrior king?" He kissed the top of her head. "Never. Not for a single second." Hope stirred in Lyra's arms, making small sounds. Her tiny hand reached up, grasping at the air, and both her parents offered their fingers for her to clutch. "She's going to be a handful," Lyra predicted. "Born in the middle of a war, daughter of a king who doesn't remember half his past, and a queen who was bought at auction. She'll have stories. The best kind of stories, the true kind." Ronan looked down at his daughter with wonder written across his scarred face. "We'll tell her everything. How you saved me when I was lost. How we survived the wilderness together. How you stood beside me when I reclaimed my throne. She'll grow up knowing that strength comes in many forms, and courage means fighting for what matters even when the odds are impossible. And when she's older and asks about the auction, about how we met, we'll tell her the truth, that her mother was the bravest woman I ever met, that she walked into the darkest place with nothing but determination and changed the course of history, that she bought a king for 25 silver and got the bargain of a lifetime." Lyra laughed softly. "I definitely got the better end of that deal." "Did you? Because from where I'm standing, I got a queen, a daughter, and a second chance at life. Seems like I came out ahead." "We both won. That's the point." She leaned into his warmth, feeling their daughter's tiny heartbeat against her chest, hearing the peaceful sounds of a city no longer at war. "We both chose each other, over and over again, until choosing became being, until partnership became love, until survival became a kingdom." Below them, Thornhaven stretched out in the darkness, no longer a conquered city, but a healing one. The scars of battle would fade, the wounds would close, and under the rule of a king who'd learned mercy and a queen who'd learned strength, the kingdom would transform into something better than it had been. Not perfect. Challenges remained, pacts to negotiate with, territories to secure, reforms to implement. Marcus's exile would create power vacuums that needed filling. Hope's position as heir would face challenges from those who believed Omega blood weakened the royal line. But they would face it all together. A king and queen who'd been forged in the wilderness and tempered in war. A partnership born from desperation and transformed into something unbreakable. Hope yawned, her tiny mouth opening impossibly wide, and both parents smiled at the simple perfection of it. This child who'd been conceived as part of a bargain and born in the space between war and peace. This daughter who would grow up knowing her parents' story, the rejected Omega and the lost king who'd found each other in the darkest place and built a kingdom from nothing but courage and hope. "I love you," Lyra said, the words simple, but weighted with everything they'd survived to reach this moment. "I love you too. Both of you." Ronan's arms encircled his family, protective and gentle. "My queen, my daughter, my purpose." The stars wheeled overhead, the city slept, and on a palace balcony high above the world, a family stood together, proof that the most impossible stories could come true, that broken people could heal, that rejected souls could find belonging, That a woman with 25 silver and a desperate plan could buy more than a man in chains. She could buy hope. She could buy a future. She could buy a second chance for herself and everyone who'd ever been told they were worthless. Lyra had walked into that frontier auction expecting to survive. She'd walked out with a kingdom. And somewhere in the wilderness beyond the city walls, in the forest where she'd first learned to fight, in the cabin where she'd first chosen to trust, in the clearing where she and Ronan had built their first shelter together, the wind whispered through the trees like a blessing. The frontier remembered. The wilderness knew. And the story would be told for generations. The rejected Omega who bought a king. The lost warrior who found his crown. The bargain that became a legend. The love that transformed a kingdom. And the daughter born in the space between war and peace who would carry their legacy into a future bright with possibility. Hope Ashbourne, Princess of Thornhaven, symbol of everything her parents had fought to build, she slept peacefully in her mother's arms, unaware of the significance of her existence, unaware that she was born from courage and desperation and stubborn refusal to accept the world as it was. But someday she would know. Someday her parents would tell her the truth, and she would understand that strength comes in many forms, that courage means fighting when the odds are impossible, that love transforms desperate bargains into kingdoms, that even in the darkest auctions, hope can be purchased for 25 silver and a brave heart. The future stretched ahead, uncertain and challenging and full of promise. But whatever came next, they would face it together. A king who remembered mercy, a queen who demanded justice, a princess who would grow up knowing that her very existence was proof that impossible dreams could become reality. The story was complete, but the life, the real, messy, beautiful life, was just beginning. And in the palace of the obsidian throne, beneath a ruthless moon that had witnessed their first desperate bargain, a family stood together and looked toward tomorrow. Ready, united, unbreakable. The rejected and the lost transformed into rulers of a new era, and the wilderness, watching from beyond the walls, whispered its approval into the endless night.